Right. Welcome back to another episode of the Joe and Doug Show. We're excited to be with you. This is the spot where we want to help you become the best version of yourself. And a trend for us, I think recently, and I think as we push into election season more and more, I think there's something like 50 some days until the election, which means 50 some days until coronavirus is over and 50 some days until a bunch of this nonsense goes away.
Do you think it's all theater? Do you think it's all made up and dramatic effect and overdone?
I think it is hyped and I think it is preyed upon. I'm not saying coronavirus isn't real. I'm saying the media will play that violin note all day long and twice on Fridays to get their agenda across.
I don't think politicians can pass on the, the taking
never let a
advantage
good
of.
crisis go to waste.
No, I really don't.
So I'm not saying that there's obviously violence in some of our major cities. There's obviously some of those things going on, but truthfully, I think as we push into election, I know our heart and one of our kind of themes is how do we bring people together that maybe don't see the world the same, but should be friends,
right.
should realize that we're all kind of in this boat together, and we may not all agree on how to row the boat, but we all need to row the boat. We may not agree on what color the boat should be painted, but we're all going to be in the boat together. And I want to touch on this. 9/11's coming up, and obviously we're in the throes of a nasty election season that it has plenty of memes to go around and everything else. But overall, it does more to divide us than bring us together. And so I want to talk about unity. I want to talk about what it means to be an American. I want to talk a little about 9/11. So let's start with the broad kind of topic. So for you, when you think of I'm an American, what does that mean to you? What's kind of your background? Were you raised kind of patriotic at home? Did it not matter? Was there a moment where you're like, I'm so glad I live in this country?
Yeah,
what was that like for you?
Well, and I can remember always gravitating towards, even in movies, that when you had selfless acts, that those inspired me the most to like give up something more than you. So I was a big supporter of the military, because Industrial Revolution and the Civil War and all of this. These were people who were willing to go and die for a belief that they couldn't see in the real world, and that kind of vision, like that's a thing that I wish all of us would have more of. Yeah, no,
absolutely. I know for me, I was definitely raised in a home. My grandfather's got to be one of the last living Korean War vets. He just turned 90 a couple days ago, and so we were raised in a patriotic home. We were raised in a home that loved the country. It wasn't anything weird though, like we didn't have like worship services with the flag or anything like that, but you honored things, you respected things, you sir and ma'am and Mr. and Mrs., and you never assumed certain things. I know there was just a decorum that went along with it too, and a culture. Loved history. That was one of my favorite subjects in school, and for me, I think realizing as I've done some traveling and as I've connected with other people from other countries, it just every time it makes me appreciate so much more that I was born in this land during this time. There's no better time, in my opinion, to be on the earth, and no better place than the United States of America. And for everybody out there that, sure, does every country have their flaws? Absolutely. And for everybody out there saying, oh, it's a terrible place and that other thing, there's plenty of other places you can go live. The last time I checked, most people are trying to get here and not go anywhere else. And there's a reason for that, because regardless of maybe what you feel are some of the flaws, this is by far the greatest country to ever grace the face of the earth. And
very good.
So I'm proud to be an American. I love the red, white, and blue. And regardless of who's in office, or irregardless, whichever the appropriate English is there, prayed for President Barack Obama, pray for President Trump, do my best to support the things that are good and call out the things that aren't and stuff like that. But I think overall, most people are exhausted by the division that's there. And so for the average American out there that's like, look, I just want to go to work. I want to get a paycheck. I want to be able to put food on the table for my kids. They really, the nonstop media coverage of everything that, the president, thinks about the last time he farted, like everything is incessantly covered. Most people just don't care. And they're either tuning out to that stuff, and the ratings bear this out. The networks that incessantly focus on him. Their ratings have actually gone down during his presidency, during President Trump's presidency. But what do you think it's going to take to bring some people together, to bring some unity to this? Do you think the election's going to solve that?
No, I do not.
Serve that one up there. No, I don't think it matters who wins. It's going to be very polarized. So how do we cut all the crap out, cut the media, cut the politics, and just say, you know what? This is we all belong. We're all here together, so let's move forward together, instead of villainizing everybody and playing victim on the other hand too. So what's it going to take?
So I used to think that it was sort of like if you had the appropriate theme, people would just join your team and we would all go sing Kumbaya and play the bongos, right? And I found that there's a certain amount of people that would be attracted to, but if you really want the people, to get all across the spectrum, you got to play a little bit different of a game. And so I created the analogy in the technical standpoint. You got 4 different people when you adopt new technology. You have the people who are willing to do it, they're all on board, right? And then you have the people that will wait to the absolute last minute to bring in that technology, and knowing that all of those exist. Now, if you go rah-rah in front of a person that has to wait, they're not interested in your words, right? They're interested in following the people that are in front of them.
Correct.
Right? So you need the leaders that are willing to adopt something that they can't see comes first. All right.
Yeah.
So what theme do you ring with the early adopters? Well, it is all about hype, and it is all about the red, white, and blue. Whatever motivates you and makes you wake out, get out of bed that day. That's where you have to start. But you have to follow through with all 4 steps. I'll give you an example. City of Youngstown, right? Yeah. We all want the city of Youngstown to do well.
Exactly.
All right. So we have people that are all in, like me. I would do anything for my city. And then you have some people who are like, it's the murder capital of the world, and wait till the other shoe drops and whatever. Yeah. But I need both of them. I need the me's out there to get on board, and I need those people who are disinterested and are cynical and whatever. So what theme could I use to bring both of those people together? It is up to the you and me's to play that drum long enough till the laggards at the very end of this have no other choice but to join in.
Interesting. I was going to kind of tip this in a different direction, because I think what you're saying is correct. I just have not seen it work.
Okay.
If that's fair. I mean,
sure.
Unless you have an example that I'm unaware of. But from a historical standpoint, usually you communicate your principles, you're dyed in the wool, you attract your team to you, and then you attract enough to take out the other side. I mean, that's pretty much across the board historically. I've never seen or read or am aware of where you have 2 polarizing groups of people that someone comes down the middle and pulls everybody in. Now, maybe there is an example historically. I'm just not aware of it. The one thing that I see throughout history that kind of pulls people back together is tragedy. So you think of 9/11. What's that, 19 years ago now? Something like that?
Yeah.
Wow, 19 years. So do you remember where you were?
Oh, yeah.
So where were you? What were you doing?
I was watching, like, a NASCAR race had just got rained out. And so I was in the morning watching the end of the race that got rained out.
Wait,
and
you watched NASCAR? You're
I
into
did,
NASCAR?
yeah.
It's one giant left turn, right?
It is,
Okay,
yes.
okay.
And so I was sitting there in front of my little TV in my bedroom, and it hit. And I was ready to go out and do my appointments for the day, but and the whole day got screwed up that way. Nobody could figure out what was going on.
Yeah, I was in New Jersey. I was actually in high school. I was in my second period American law class, or maybe third period, and they locked the whole school down because we were like an hour and a half from the city, but it was like people's parents worked there, so it was like it was real for the rest of the country, but it was like real for
close enough that
like my dad works there or my mom works there, or World Trade Center employs a ton of people. I mean, not like everybody in the school had somebody, but there were a handful of students that was the case. And the closer you got to the city, the more that was true. But I remember the school got locked down, and we were all trying to like figure out like what happened, and it was just a weird day. But I can remember like, I don't know, maybe it was a day later or 2 days later, and President Bush gave his megaphone speech standing on top of the rubble, and just powerful moments like that. Nobody was a Democrat or Republican at that point. Like the people in New York City that didn't vote for President Bush, like nobody cared about that.
Right.
We just knew that we had been attacked, and for, would you say, 12 to 18 months, the country really pulled together. And maybe some of the legislation that was passed during that time wasn't the greatest stuff in the world, but we were in it. Like we were hurt, you were hurt. Like we connected in our pain, and I wonder for our nation right now if there is a message that can pull people together, or if unfortunately it would take another tragedy like a 9/11.
But those are always so temporary in nature, because basically what happens is we get uncomfortable, and then what matters to us comes through, and then when we get comfortable again, now we get petty again and get irritated by things that don't matter. And so you know, and that's why, you know, if this was an easy thing, we would have nailed unity, you know, by this point. So what you said earlier is that you know, if you intend to unify the entire country, it's going to take more than a flag and a song to be able to do it. And so like when you strategize, like I'll tell you what the beauty of this is. The national like memory is so short. Okay, and if you can accomplish a generational assumption, right, you can get unity by default. And it's sort of like mind trickery for an entire nation. So I'll give you, for instance, like when I first started doing radio, you know, the first generation of people listening to me on the radio were the, you know, does this guy know what he's doing? Right? And then the second generation was, hey, he's on the radio, he must know what he's talking about. And then the third generation is like, wow, you know, I'm not even going to question it because he's always been there and whatever. And I didn't do anything different between generations, but it was an assumed thing. All right. So if you can just, you know, if you take some cynics who are saying something about Youngstown, and you can go long enough without acknowledging their existence, right? And you can get to the next generation without them having a voice or having any energy, by default, you get an assumption that that must not be the stronger of the two opinions, and you graduate in there by default.
Okay, so long game versus short game.
Yes.
So short game, yes, tragedy does produce unity, but it's usually short-lived. 9/11 was 12, 18 months before everybody went back to their corners. And I would agree with that sentiment. And I think when you look throughout history, you see people pulling together during hard economic times, through World War I, World War II. You see that kind of patriotism and yeah, those sort of sentiments, but then they always die out as the conflict ends, or as you know, certain feelings end. So if you were running for office, what would be your slogan? What would you do to bring people back to be proud of their country, proud of their area, whether it's local or national office? What would Joe do to produce unity? How would you have a team of rivals like Abraham Lincoln, and have people in your cabinet that and or on your team that were totally opposite?
I would not play the game how everybody else plays it. I would set it up as this deal. I feel that our goodwill towards each other eroded slowly over time. Like, our system is brilliant that, you know, if we put people at odds, then great decisions come because we're at odds. But if you see long term, being at odds with people who you really don't have that much difference with erodes that goodwill towards that other person. So you give it 200 years, and the society as a whole gets used to fighting so much, they forgot that they were only fighting to produce a better product. So I would go and do the reverse erosion, where you would have to do the same thing, but instead of arguing, we would have to do agreement, or, you know, kind of, you know, we stage the arguments in Congress, in the halls of Congress, so good things happen. Now we get to stage the unity long enough, and you have to know what I'm doing, right? I'm going to do it on purpose, and you're going to go along with it on purpose, and we could do it long enough, and we erode it in the other direction.
Interesting. Because I think when you talk branding, marketing, any of that sort of stuff, you usually can't cut the middle of the road. Usually you just have to pick one, and a lot of times polarizing wins. If we learned anything from President Trump's last campaign, he knew how to stay in the media spotlight 24 hours a day. As much as the media love them some Donald Trump loves him some media, and he knows how to stay in the headlines. Even no news is bad news. He'll say the dumbest thing, and it's just to keep his name at the top of the headline, top of the tweets, top of the hashtags, because he knows that it totally worked the system. It didn't play their system. It didn't pan out in the polls like it's not panning out in the polls now, but it plays out on election day because it's what works. Our system is built around that conflict. Whether you go on the left or the right media channels, whether you engage in just a normal conversation with somebody on the opposite side, it's set up to be Pepsi versus Coke. And you're saying, I'm going to develop a third product.
Yes.
That's not Pepsi or Coke. And I'm going to say, all you Pepsi people and all you Coke people, this is the product you need to have. Is that what I'm doing?
Well, and I'm not. It's basically when you're out in your real world, you get to have to say certain things. But then when you come into this tent, you're a little bit freer to just go after truth. Right? We're not here to alienate we're not here to celebrate anything. We're just on the pursuit of truth. And that's where I would be. Like there's some parts of every political persuasion that are just terrible. Like they don't even like it internally, but they tolerate it because they need more people into that group because it's strategy for being election. See, I didn't say that I would actually win any kind of election because my deal I would be hated by everyone.
Yeah.
Across the board.
Sure. Yeah, it's certainly not a way to win an election. I think, and I think we're going to see more polarization in politics, not less. I just think it's set up for that. But I think the vast majority of people want what you're talking about. They just don't believe it's possible.
Okay, so let's use Libertarian Party, for instance. Like every election, we talk about like, we need a third party thing, but when it actually comes down to brass tacks, the people who could go vote are like, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to be the first one. So does this remind you of the whole laggard thing, where you don't want to be the first guy to go do a dumb thing? You want to only do it after the third party is a deal.
Well, so last time there was a website that was set up. I don't know if you saw it for the 2016 election. It was called like One for One. And basically what they would do is a libertarian set up. I think Gary Johnson was the candidate last time. And if you were a Republican, a registered Republican that committed to vote Libertarian, they would match you up with a Democrat that committed to vote Libertarian so that you weren't actually losing, and it was a wash. And I was like, that's kind of creative in that sense. You're saying like, hey, we want to alleviate this fear because people are like, well, I don't want to throw the election for one side or the other. And it would help too if, the Libertarians, could like nominate somebody that wasn't like a complete pothead and, had some decent
UFOs.
Decent policy, and wasn't totally crazy.
Sorry, Libertarian Party.
No, but I think probably at my core, if I had to pick, my tendencies tend to be more like I just want to be left alone. Socially I'm conservative, but I think for the most part, I just want to be left alone. Like just, the less of the government in my life, the better off I am. And so where I tend to be at odds with certain things is when people want more government in their world, and that pits those two are polar opposites. But at some level, we should. What you're saying is, hey, where's the middle ground here?
Well, not even all the time. There's some time where middle ground's the worst thing that you can do.
Okay.
So like, let's just say farmers, right?
Yeah.
You can plant trees and then you can harvest trees. Those are two ends of the spectrum that sometimes it's a good idea to be planting and sometimes it's a good idea to be harvesting. What if you wielded the tool that was necessary for the best part of people and your economy and whatever? What if the economy was great? It was like, hey, let's bring some of this money down and put it somewhere else. So I'm going to have a leanings over here without it running away and doing that all of the time. But that's the kind of thing, like if you're in the middle, that you can see that there's good and bad on both sides, and let's not just run in that direction all the time.
Yeah, no, it totally makes sense. I have a feeling though, we have a generation of people right now, and the polarization is that we're, to use your language, we're functioning off of two different operating systems. So there's two different startup systems, there's two different layouts for the files. We may be in the same country, but there's people on two different sides of the issue that look at the nation and they say, some people are like, this is the greatest place on earth and everything else, and other people are like, this place is horrible, it's racist, it's terrible. And you're literally you're starting with two different presuppositions.
But and I think that sometimes, like when you hear somebody who's very partisan, when the stuff that comes out of their hole, do you think they really believe it? Do you think they switched off like better sense, or do you think they're just playing a role and they have to say those things?
I don't. It's interesting. It's kind of like the way I think about it. It's kind of like your favorite sports team. So, like, I grew up in the Philadelphia area, just outside of Philadelphia in South Jersey. So I grew up an Eagles fan, a Flyers fan, a Sixers fan. You learn the mantra. I learned the fight songs. I could tell you who was on the team and the stats and the history and those things because you took pride in your team. And, are the Dallas Cowboys really a bad team? But we hate the Cowboys. The Cowboys are never allowed to be a good team. Like, they could be the best team in football, and we hate the Cowboys, if that makes sense. They could have the nicest people on their team. Tim Tebow could have been their quarterback and won 3 Super Bowls, and I would have hated his guts. The fact, like, at the end of the day, like, some of it is upbringing. Like, you're raised to love a certain team. So some of our politics right now, people have been raised in it, and then others have been converted to their side. But once you put the jersey on, everybody's like, well, are you committed or not? Are you just a fair weather fan? Like, that sort of same atmosphere with like NFL football teams. And so then, yeah, they're communicating the mantra of their team because that's their tribe. And so you don't want to you don't want to be on the back end or the nasty side of your team. You don't want to be seen as a sellout. And so those things hurt. And unfortunately, when you have that sort of tribalism, to use that term, it continues to create more and more polarization, because
but you have to if you're going to convert somebody to any kind of persuasion, you got to appeal to a sense that has to be inside of them. And those people, I'm thinking, either they're in complete denial and they really know something that they're saying is something they don't believe in. If they're doing it for the team, then you could still appeal to that. And then sometimes I look at some of these politicians who've been doing it for 40 years, and I don't know that they don't believe what they're actually saying and doing the partisan no matter what.
So I'll take a whole spiritual context, because as pastor, we deal in conversions all the time. And so the vast majority of folks that will end up coming through our doors at the church and convert and have an experience where they give their life to God or repent or whatever, become born again, whatever your phrase you want to attach to that, I would say a lot of them are coming out of really bad experiences. About 50% or more are
the peril that we're talking about earlier.
They're coming out of a tragedy, whether that is a drug addiction, a broken marriage, whatever. Just they lost their job, they're in a bad spot, and so they're looking for something to pick them up. And so they come in, they find this message of hope, and they attach to it, and then will rebuild their life with some of those principles, and then be loyal to the team, so to speak. And then you have other people that have been raised in it and kind of, they fell away a little bit. They didn't really take it seriously. They went off and sowed their, the Royal Oats in college and stuff like that. And then they start having kids, and they're like, wow, I need to teach my kids some good stuff, and maybe I'm not as good a person as I thought I was, and so I need to figure this out. And so you'll see that boomerang effect, and those folks in their 30s and 40s will come back because, well, it's good for the kids. And then they realize, well, it's actually good for me too, and they'll engage in that. And then you have about 20 or so percent that are kind of raised in it. But I find for the 5%, if you will, that come from the polar opposite side of the spectrum, very rarely do you see that. It's very rare. Most of the time, they have some sort of landing pad for them to come in. People that are on the other side either harden their spot and stay put, not going to be a part, not interested, whatever. They'll continue to dig their heels in until they have a tragedy or until one of those couple of effects takes place. I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, but when I picture, my biggest adversary, I kind of like go through the rehearsal of what I would do if I was put in the same room and take that worst case scenario and convert that person, the one that you think is going to be the hardest to be able to do. They're the the unicorn kind of a thing. And so like when I'm talking about the hardcore Democrats or the hardcore Republicans, and if you're coming up with an appeal plan that if you're talking unity, it means that some principle has to exist in all people that you need to go call on when you need it, aside from the defenses that they've made about that appeal.
Yeah, I agree. I just I think it's easier to pick off those in the middle, the low-hanging fruit, so to speak, to come to your cause than it will be the person that's far right or far left, because they're just going to further entrench themselves. So I think we have a long way to go. I mean, I'm excited to see what this election's going to bring. I think it's going to be very, very interesting. I'm not sure who's going to win, but regardless, I think it's going to be interesting season. I'll say that.
Yeah.
But I hope that we can, through this, bring people together. That's really my heartbeat, your heartbeat. We want to see unity. We're all Americans before we're Democrats or Republicans or whatever else. But we've gotten so entrenched in these sides and so entrenched in a belief system that we miss that red, white, and blue for all of us.
Yeah, for
So,
sure.
Well, we hope that you enjoyed the show, and you'll join us back here next Tuesday.
All right. See you guys.